Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed your coffee. So we have the last panel debate for today. And we're going to talk about how to bridge the gap between business, IT, and data science. And with me here today, I have Sara Sylvan. She is a product owner in the data science team called Connected Intelligence at Scania. You're collecting data from the vehicles, right?
That's right.
Yeah. You're going to tell us more about that. And then we have Celine, a data scientist from Axel spending your days coding, coaching, and building a community around data science in your company. And then we have Ellie Dobson, who's the director of AI engineering at GraphCore and heading up the AI engineering team in Oslo. Yes, so give a warm welcome to the panelists. So I think the best way to kick off this panel is just by, if you could describe a little bit more about your role today and the way of working in your company. Would you like to start, Sara?
Thank you. So I'm product owner for a data science, data engineering research team at Scania. And so my role is to bridge this gap between business, IT, and the data scientists.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm a senior data scientist in a central excellency team belonging to Axel. Maybe you are not familiar with the name, but maybe from consumer perspective, you're familiar with some brand like Kicks, Allianz, and Martin Severa, or we as a company own them. And I spend my day 60% of time coding, actually deliver directly off the production, 40% of time, and do the strategy for the different company, and also for embracing a community of data scientists within the group.
Thank you so much.
All right. So I'm actually brand new at GraphCore. I've only been there for 3 weeks. So I'll probably be talking a little bit more about the lessons I learned in my previous company, which is a company called Arundo, where I grew a data science team from 0 to about 16 people. And it's a data science team and an engineering organization. So in growing and kind of developing that team, we tried to integrate the data science team in a multitude of different ways. Some of those worked and some of those didn't. And now I'm at a new company. I'm hoping to take forward the ways that worked and also perhaps share with you some of the lessons we learned.
Yeah. Very interesting. You have a really relevant background for this panel. Very happy to have you here today. So what would you say, if you could describe the roles and how you are organized and the way that you work together with the business and IT and data science?
You want me to start?
Yeah, sure.
So I just recently come out of a rather successful, I would say, cooperation where we actually created this cross-functional team, sitting together, co-located, business, IT, and the data scientists, and that's how I believe we have to work. But of course, Scania is a huge company, so we have data scientists at different places in the organization. We have a big IT organization, and we have a lot of business functions, of course. So for those of you who don't know, we create heavy vehicles, trucks and buses, and engines.
Yeah, totally agree. For our daily life, we are a project-based, cross-functional team. It's called experimental approach. So unless we actually find the value from the experiment, we will not decide to scale them. At the same time, we also sort of create an academy called Analytical Academy, and we design 5 different training within the group to train people from the introduction from analytic to specific data scientist skills. So to warm people up before they have specific project.
Yeah, again, third time's a charm, another cross-functional one. So I've spent my time working in software organizations. I've worked in data science silos, where it's just a data science organization, and then there's an engineering organization, and there's very little interaction, and what we found is it doesn't work so well. At least it didn't work so well for us. So in recent years, what I've been working in and encouraging people around me to work in is cross-functional team, where you have an engineer and a data scientist maybe another engineer, project manager and commercial lead all sitting in kind of a pod centered around either a product or a project, depending on what it is you're doing.
So all of you are using cross-functional teams. That's the setup you're aiming for. Is there really a gap then? Or is it everything working smoothly?
I would say that nothing is ever working smoothly, but at least it's working. I tried setups that where we didn't work cross-functional, and that wasn't working at all for me.
Yeah. So basically the silo.
Yeah, we ended up in the silo. People creating things that didn't have value because they wasn't driven by value. So the business were disappointed, and the data scientists were disappointed, and IT felt neglected, and nothing really worked out in the end.
Yeah. Anyone else want to share the silo versus the cross-functional?
I can share a few or a story of the sort of thing that doesn't work in a cross-functional setup, which is that data science, which is my business, data science and artificial intelligence, it's kind of inherently unpredictable by nature. So you don't really know, when you get a data set, you don't know if the model that you're building is going to really succeed or not until you've kind of done all the work of building the model. So if you kind of work in a cross-functional team where you've got an engineering organization or an engineer sitting next to you expecting some sort of software interface to the work, that can kind of fall down and you can end up with some disappointed engineers. If the model doesn't work, and you can't really say that until you've worked on it for a month or two, which isn't exactly an agile approach. One way we found to get around that is make sure that, and I'll be talking about this in my talk later, is building the simplest possible model you possibly can from day one. You know, that could be like a number generator. The outcome of your data science endeavors can be something that just spits out 5, and so then the software is built around that interface or API, and then increase the model complexity as you go along.
So start small, we've heard that.
Start small and have a good, robust UX UI interface around what you're doing. So design, the product or project or whatever you're building kind of from top down, and then have the data science, the machine learning spitting out initially random numbers, and then start, because then the entire chain is kind of in place and you can start to increase complexity rather than embarking on like a long 1-2 month development cycle in DS and then coming out with a model that, it doesn't work, it doesn't have the right predictability, we need more data, etc.
So could you explore a little bit about gaps between data science and IT? Like, how do you differentiate between the two and how do you work together? So not.
Yeah, I would say like from data scientist perspective, when you talk about gap, the first question I will ask is what's the definition of gap? So I would say the gap from different companies different, but I want to classify it in 3 big different thing. One is I call it priority. It's based on the role, KPI, the responsibility. The second one is perception, which due to the different background from different role or different people. And third one is communication. I would say the third one is the most easy to solve, as well as you're aware of your audience and you learn the terminology and you keep transparency. It's solved. But the hardest one is actually the priority. So even though you gather people together, if their responsibility not align, for example, the data scientists normally want to build as accuracy model as they can. However, from business perspective, they don't really want to know the detail of the error or confidence interval. They just want as quick to get it. And from IT perspective, maybe their KPI is have a robustest, which means this model can work on any single scenario. And when they come together, they're never aligned. So there's definitely a gap.
Yeah. Does that also have to do with understanding each other and where everyone is coming from, their different agendas?
Yeah,
yeah.
I think so.
So how do you build that trust in each other and build a better understanding of what the other ones are doing, sort of that you're dependent on?
I would say that you work with collocation, sit together, interact, use like ordinary agile methods. I mean, we know how to do software projects. And I would consider this to be basically nothing different than a software project. So keep communication, keep the agile methods working, and I believe that that's the best way to overcome the obstacles, and just talk to each other.
You make it sound very simple. Yeah.
So I can offer some words on my own personal experience on the gap between data science and IT, which comes from the sort of companies I've worked for. So I worked for a company called Pivotal for a while, which is basically owned by EMC. And EMC builds expensive databases and data lakes. So often what would happen is EMC would go in and sell a very expensive data lake to some enterprise customer. And again, this is coming back to all the things that keep on getting reflected about kind of working in short cycles rather than siloed large projects. But this is what the data lake business was, especially 2-3 years ago, I'd say. And so this data lake would get built, expensive, long project. And then after it was built, customer would say, okay, well, we've got the data lake, where's the money? And EMC would say, well, we don't know, we build data lakes, but here's Pivotal, they do kind of data science and stuff. And at that point, we would then be brought in and try and help the customer generate value. And it often didn't work because you'd find out, well, this data just isn't relevant for the kind of business needs you're trying to address. And it could be actually quite painful, that sort of cycle. So something which we experimented on in later years, and also at my previous company, Arundo, is instead of thinking in terms of data lakes, which is by definition a large silo project in isolation, thinking more about data ponds and data puddles. So working with IT encouraged to set up accessible smaller chunks of data that you can actually work with, and then approach the problem from the business and go down rather than starting from the data and moving upwards. So starting with a question, moving down to what data supports a first iteration answer to that question, and then having IT build out the data infrastructure that way. So lots of little puddles that eventually join up rather than long cycle data lake process.
Yeah, I think we've all experienced that pain with data platform initiatives being too slow or too not to the point what the data scientists needs. So one of the questions that the audience have submitted is who should be owning the data in a company?
Sorry, it's a little bit cliche, but I would say from our company perspective, seriously, we believe the consumer own their own data. But if you actually want to ask from a master data management perspective, I would say the IT department normally are the owner. But from our project perspective, I suggest the actually business project own that part of data is much better. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I feel very strongly about owning data as in not sharing data. That's the history. It used to be like that. No one wanted to share the data with the others, and that's completely wrong. You never own anything. But as an information owner, it's extremely important to make sure that the data is used only for what it's valid for. When we come back to bias, as we discussed this before at this day. So.
Yeah. So how would you say, so data scientists and also IT many times are sort of the business is never satisfied enough with what IT and data science is delivering. How can you mitigate that? Sort of how can you be on your toes when it comes to the business needs as a data scientist and being in IT?
So I would again echo the point about starting from the business question and the business need straight up. So rather than, often having worked as a consultant with enterprises who are hoping to make more out of their data, the most obvious thing to do, if you've heard a lot about big data, is you think about the data and you start from the data rather than starting straight with a cross-disciplinary team but headed by the business units and saying what are the questions. So you're starting with the business need and then assessing the feasibility, and that's kind of more the domain of IT and data science. And then building, so then you've got a set of questions or needs that you might want to answer. And the next thing is trying to create a roadmap out of those questions. So there was this article by Hilary Mason in HBR a little while ago, and I really love Hilary Mason. I think she's awesome. And something she pointed out is when you have this ubiquitous kind of feasibility versus business value plot, often it's thought of as a matrix, instead of just having questions in isolation, actually trying to draw lines between those questions and saying which questions will help us to answer, more complex questions that maybe involve more data, more expensive, more risky, and trying to build a roadmap from those questions. So you start from a really simple kind of low risk, low gain kind of question, and then start trying to make your way to kind of the higher risk and higher gain end of the spectrum.
And I would also like to add that that's the common wall of confusion. Like, bring them along with the team, and they will understand why it takes time. It's only when you stand outside you feel like, oh, I don't see a progress. But if you are in the team as business, they will see the progress, see what's happening, and I believe that will answer a lot of the questions.
Totally agree. And just go back to the cross-functional team. We actually separate cross-functional team to core team and or the stakeholder. And for core team, we have each role have each work stream. The first one, as you said, should be driven by business, so the business problem, and then analytic, and then we have IT. And the fourth one, actually really important, we call it process changing. So we assume if we actually deliver an analytic product, the only value for it is people use it. And when people use it, the way of working will definitely change. So we want to involve people at the beginning of the process.
So the question then, how do we build the trust between business, IT, and data science? And I think that what you said is if we bring the business people to IT and to the data science and they learn more about the ways of working, they understand that it takes time and it's complex and all that. What about the other way around? Like really not being only on top of like really technical stuff, but really understanding the business needs. How do we make the technical people have a higher understanding of the business?
So the way that as a consultant helping enterprises get more out of their data, the way that we typically did that is, again, sorry, it's getting a bit of a stuck record, but getting cross-disciplinary teams working together over a single defined need or question. So we would bring all these different units in the same room at the same time. A lot of people are now running these kind of workshops. Look at the different questions. What is the feasibility? What is the business need? Plotting it as a matrix rather than two separate kind of tracks, and then defining the questions. And once questions have been defined, working from the top down to then to the data and then to the IT to answer the question. And then the other thing I wanted to say on that is the importance of a cross-disciplinary team within data science. So I think a common mistake, I've certainly made it, is hiring a lot of people with very similar skill set. So if you're hiring a data science team saying, okay, well, you want lots of people who have lots of things about deep learning over on the CV and have excellent programming skills, that kind of tends to take you more in the direction of hiring a lot of academics, and academics are great. I'm an ex-academic myself, but if you have within a corporate environment or business environment, if you have just academics in the team, they tend not to be thinking with that kind of where's the value, show me the money kind of hat on. When I first left academia and went and worked for a company, I was actually stunned to discover that business value was actually a thing. Like, no joke. It actually made me kind of stop and think about doing something because you should, as opposed to because you can, which is the only thing that academics, or at least I as an academic, was thinking about. So hiring a team where you have people who are coming from academia and also people who are coming from the more kind of AI engineering places like Microsoft, Google, Facebook, those kind of places. And then thirdly, having people who do come from a business-orientated setting, such as McKinsey, for example, if you want to get, span all, cover all bases.
Yeah. What we used was also when we had the sprint reviews, delivering new stuff, we also had a process of how to use that added along with the delivery of the data science product. So that way, I think you also ensure that the value is created.
I have a question, actually a really good question for the audience. What is the best way to make it work when a cross-functional team is not just possible? Because you're talking about cross-functional, and not all the companies can do cross-functional. So what is the best way to go when it's not possible with cross-functional teams?
Solve why it's not possible.
It never happened to me, so I don't know.
You mean because the company won't allow it? I mean, I've seen environments where companies, it's quite common now, you see things they're usually called labs, where they bring people out of the usual, like I'm assuming the question is about kind of enterprise with a lot of, the larger ones. They have a lot of process and that kind of thing, and it's just, as a data scientist, you're asking how can we actually, break the shackles of these processes. Something I've seen quite a lot in companies nowadays is having like a lab within the company where people are brought together in those kind of environments. If that's also not possible, I guess if you are the hiring manager, then do this. If you're not the hiring manager, then encourage your hiring manager to make sure that you do have a cross-disciplinary team within, for me it's data science because that's where I sit.
I would say, like, in this situation, we need to know why it's impossible. And one of our learning is we need to guarantee the leadership buy-in for all the project. Then the leadership will devote the time, the resource to each project. And of course, I would say start small, start simple to build up the sort of confidence of the whole crowd is also important.
Do you have any other questions, or should I move on?
I think the other question have already been answered. So I'm fine.
Yeah. Very good. So talking about impact on scaling project into production, so not only staying in like trying things out and proof of concepts, and we've heard about that during the day-to-day. Does that have an impact how you're organized and how you work in your cross-functional team?
So I'm a little hesitant about the idea of scaling things into production. I would say that Pivotal, again, I often think about Pivotal and the way they work when I think about these kind of things. They've got a very particular way of building applications, test-driven development, pair programming, and continuous integration. So you wouldn't really think about, let's prototype, now let's go and productionize. It can be a little tricky to do with data science because you don't know how accurate your model is going to be before you've built it. But taking an approach of having a continuously integrated model into the application or whatever it is you're building, and increasing the complexity of the model. So you start with a guaranteed win. We will just do some reporting. We'll just tell you what the numbers are. And then we will try to do some prediction or some uncertainty estimation on top of the reporting. But having the plumbing set up so that model is always talking to the production environment and integrated within the production environment from day one is, from what I've seen in just my personal experience, a more effective way than having this kind of cliff edge where the prototyping's finished and now the productionization may start. One thing where maybe there's an exception to that is I worked in oil and gas quite a bit, and that's kind of a safety critical environment. So you can't just have models which you don't really understand just out there predicting stuff, people who are making decisions that could literally be life and death. in which case I would advocate the approach of having two models, like a production model and a prototype model, but both are running within the same kind of plumbing, with the same infrastructure, with the same API, running alongside each other, and so then you can kind of compare the two predictions within two production-like environments.
So I was thinking, we're talking about, we all agree that cross-functional is the way to go, even though everyone doesn't seem to have that as a possibility. But so cross-functional, and we're talking about kind of big chunks here, like IT, business, data scientists. Can we be more specific? Like, what's your experience on what kind of roles are really key here to make that cross-functional team work?
Except what you just asked, what you just said, I will add the sponsors.
Yeah.
So not in the team, of course, but to have the manager as sponsors, especially on the business side, they are the one with the money. That is crucial for the success. If you have a sponsor, then it will happen. Otherwise, I'm not sure if I know how to answer your question.
Like I'm looking for like data engineers, or like what are the roles if you're gonna create a very successful team? What are the key roles in that team?
For us, we have we call it analytical translator, which is lead the business team to sort of understand the business logic, to add that to the model. And we have data scientist, and also, as you said, the scaling is the big problem. We realized it after 1 year. So now we're adding a data engineer at the beginning into the team to give suggestion about future architecture and the pipeline at the beginning. And also the sponsor, we call it stakeholder. We have a sort of bi-week demo, so we involve all the stakeholder, sometimes not even like direct link to the project, but we actually advertise the whole project to create a wellness. At the same time, I remember there was one syndrome called IKEA effect, or I can't remember the time, which means the more you involve the people will feel like this product, this work belong to themselves. They were more like willing to accept. So we involve people since the beginning.
So bear in mind I have a kind of bias towards teams that build applications, because that's what I've been doing, but the most effective setup I've seen for that so far is a front-end engineer, back-end engineer, who's also taking care of the kind of data engineering, data scientist. Something that's often overlooked, in my opinion, but is probably the most important person, is UX UI in application building. Project manager, also really important, and commercial lead, 6 people.
What kind of roles do you have in your current setup?
Data scientist, data engineer, business, and business product owner from the business side, and IT enablers.
Any other questions from the audience in the app? No. So if you could give a couple of advices for the audience to wrap this discussion up. So some key takeaways that they should, your best advice.
Aim for value. I mean,
Again,
we have to create value. I mean, we should always start there and make sure that value is real, that someone buys in on this.
Yeah. So the focus on creating the values. So not doing data science just for the sake of it.
Never.
Yeah.
And aim for production.
Yeah.
I'm totally with you. You should never create a proof of concept and then go for production. You should assume that it will end up in production.
Number 1, start from the question, not the data. Number 2, keep it simple.
Okay, so for me, I would say the first things you need to guarantee the leadership buy-in. And the second thing is you have to, within the team, you have to keep communicate and believe you work together towards the same goal.
Excellent. Thank you so much.